A little bit ago, Amanda and I were invited onto Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio to talk about debt from a Catholic perspective. I'd like to share that episode with you today.
So, what's trending? Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
What is a Catholic approach to debt? Do you bring your faith into your finances? I think it's easy when it comes to faith to think, oh yeah, of generosity and tithing. You may or may not do that. You may make excuses for why you don't tithe, or maybe you're really great at tithing, but that's as far as your faith reaches into your purse or your wallet, whatever it is. I mean, some guys do both now. So, what we're diving into is a Catholic approach to debt. Have you actually ever thought about the church has teachings on things such as usury and a plethora of statements all throughout the Bible about finances, about money, whether it's just an analogy to the kingdom of heaven and the soul and the human person, or actually talking about money literally and how we should approach it. And so joining me now are Jonathan and Amanda Taxera from walletwin.com. We just had a great conversation about how to save money on your groceries. I learned a lot. I hope you will too. If you didn't catch it, be sure to listen to the podcast. And we're linking to other episodes where Jonathan and Amanda, who are Catholic financial coaches from walletwin.com, join me. So be sure to check out that link on social media and in the episode notes. So, my goodness, where do we begin? There's so much to discuss when it comes to a Catholic approach to debt. What would you say a beginning Catholic principle would be to take into the topic of debt as we start to scratch the surface of this conversation?
I'd say we must keep in mind, in some ways, the ultimate debt that we owe and did owe and was paid, and that of Jesus on the cross for us. But when it comes to money, I'd like just to think of debt is not, and many things when it comes to money, there are not super black and white, razor sharp distinctions between right and wrong, yes and no. There's a lot of prudential judgment. There's a lot of responsibility to form to have good formation so that we can rely on our consciences and make these decisions. And some things will be a good idea and a good choice for some folks and a bad one for others. So we enter into this zone where we now maybe look more to principles to guide us instead of a straight yes and no answer.
Mm-hmm. And I think that sometimes in the world of personal finance for a long time, the idea has been that, debt is wrong. Debt should be something that we run from at all costs, that it has no place in a family's life. Mm-hmm. And that's not completely or entirely true when we look at it from a Catholic perspective. And how we really coach people on this, here we are in the United States of America, where people are actually so riddled and strapped down in debt that it's preventing us from being able to say yes to God, what God's asking us to in our vocations and in our life. That's a problem. So, and really, if you look at that type of debt being consumed and utilized by people, it is a non-productive type of debt. It is usually a lifestyle type of debt, or they, entered into debt beyond their ability to repay. So non-productive debt versus more productive debt is the conversation that we really encourage people to enter into. Some examples of this would be productive debt. And what I mean by that is something that typically, if you take on debt to purchase this item, it is now going to go up in value, or it is going to produce an income for you. For example, would be a mortgage. This is something that typically, if you're going to take a mortgage on, it is debt. And this is the asset that you now have, your house, is with time going to go up in value, making the debt that you entered into a good deal in most circumstances if you hold the asset long enough. Versus in our day and age, a lot of people are putting the Costco trips on the credit card, or the Disney vacation on the credit card, or they're purchasing a a vehicle that is now going down in value. So now they're not only paying interest on something, but their money is literally just flying out the doors of the vehicle that they are driving as this just tremendously loses value year after year. And so we really do encourage people to make those distinguishers. Am I considering taking on productive debt that could actually benefit my family or, serve as an investment to create income for us? Or is this non-productive debt that is just really hampering up our income and trapping us in the past and not freeing us to live what God's asking us to in the present moment?
It's interesting when you mention productive versus non-productive debt, because even one of my producers, Patrick, just commented that he wouldn't even consider mortgage a debt per se, and I think you could even argue that it in many respects is an asset that you're building up. And it's interesting though, because you gave the example of a house being productive debt, but different from a car. And it sounds like you even have a different approach to navigating taking on debt with regard to cars. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, what Amanda was talking about, it's when we use debt, right? We can look at it as a financial tool that in some ways allows money to travel through time. Our earnings or our hopeful earnings in the future are pulled back in time for use today. So by doing that for, say, a house, that is something that in the future will hopefully, could be sold maybe even for more value than we paid, even in consideration of the interest that we paid as part of the loan. And so that's a very, very good thing then if it works out that way too, economically. Now for the car, unless it ends up being some sort of crazy limited edition, ended up being the new Batmobile or something car, there's almost no way on earth that you're going to sell your, 8-year-old used car for anywhere near the same that you paid for it, let alone more, and kind of get some of that interest back. So when we're using this tool and kind of maybe in some ways paying a price in order to use it by paying more through the interest, we need to make sure it's worth it. We need to make sure that it's a good use of that tool. Otherwise, I'm going around the house, swatting flies with a hammer instead of using the proper tool and causing destruction as I go.
I love the example. I'm just imagining the hammer and the fly attempt over here, Jonathan. That's Jonathan and Amanda Taxera from walletwin.com, diving into a Catholic approach to debt. So we were discussing productive versus non-productive debt. What would you consider non-productive debt always immoral? Because I think that's where you dive into Catholic faith. And I know you mentioned, there isn't exactly a total black and white. We have to have really be formed in our Catholic faith. And I think prudence is so key, and both thinking about something and praying about it as well, not just jumping in because we can. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on addressing productive debt, maybe a little bit more so from a moral perspective as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So actually, just speaking more morally, it could kind of be a both and if this could be a wise use of this tool or not. In an old missal that we found, it was so fascinating. One of the examination of conscience questions on the list was, did I enter into debt beyond my power of repayment? And, that was really the moral question to consider there, which I found amazing, because nowadays in most modern examination of consciences, you'll never find anything about personal finances or money at all, when it really is something that you ought to consider, because money is a morally weighty issue. Even though in and of itself it is neutral, it's morally weighty. And so, is unproductive or non-productive debt a sin? Well, maybe in some circumstances. Let's say you accidentally took the money that your family needed for groceries and you went and spent it at the casino instead, and you racked up a bunch of debt at the casino. Well, that would be a sin because it prevented you from caring for those under your charge. Now, if you just didn't know any better and you just got into a financial pinch and you financed a car and it's within your ability to pay back and to pay down and to ultimately try to pay off, well, that's another question. You're making your payments. You're trying to get ahead of this thing. That was not a sin at all. and you're making progress on that. It just, now you maybe know a better way to go about it in the future.
I think it's funny Amanda mentioned going to the casino. I think looking at games of chance morally can be instructive. The Catechism does teach us that games of chance in and of themselves are not immoral. However, if our participation in them hampers our ability to take care of the necessities, to take care of those under our charge, then it does become immoral. It is a sin. And so in some ways, we have to look at, is the choice I'm making with my money, if it's a risky or an unwise choice, say for unproductive debt, is it to a level where the good left undone is weighty enough for that then to become immoral? So maybe the thing, having a car payment isn't necessarily immoral. I would say most of the time it's probably unwise. Now, taking that unwise action, is it keeping me back from the good that I could do with that money instead of paying it to the car dealer? Mm-hmm. Is it hampering my ability to provide for my kids, to give charitably, to make the priority, to align the priorities in my life in such a way that it makes more sense with an integrated faith? So if that's happening, then maybe you're getting there with it being immoral.
I love where you mentioned that Catholic mass missal that had that question on the examination of conscience: did I enter into debt beyond my power of repayment? I find many millennials down have found themselves well beyond their power of repayment. They weren't given principles or tools or even understood, for example, even just what they were committing to when they signed up for their student loan debt and how high some of those payments can actually be for some people. Again, there's a difference between the government funding versus private, a whole nother ball of wax. But I love what you were saying when it came to, certain things aren't, for example, games of risk or chance aren't necessarily immoral, but it is dependent upon your responsibility and those entrusted to your care. But I think one of the challenges is that people aren't looking at the big picture, because I have many of my peers who during their single years haven't or didn't really have a very prudential approach to debt. And because they didn't have anyone additionally that they were responsible for, they were slow in, let's say, paying off student loan debt, or maybe they were quick to take on additional debts for those things that they might have wanted. And so when they're looking to get married or as they're navigating having children, they're in a real tough financial spot today. So my question is, how would you advise counseling people that are under our influence to have this Catholic approach ahead of the seasons of life that they'll be in?
Yeah, I mean, we encourage people all the time, that are new college grads or singles in their 20s and 30s, even though you might not be at your final vocation. Everything we're doing right now is just vocational prep work, right? This is the time when we're building virtue, and we can actually continue. We can make a self-gift of ourselves right now to our future spouse or our future parish or our future convent by working on ourselves today, even though we're not in that vocation now. And so with money, I do encourage people, because the temptation is, I'll deal with that someday when I get to X, when I cross that line. But again, you're right. You explained what so many people have run into. Two people neglecting to take care of their personal finances wind up getting married, and now there's a giant ball and chain of debt hampering them and preventing them from actually having any source of freedom in building their family. And that is, avoidable if you can make a plan to pay off any non-productive debt that you have quickly. We teach people how to pay that off quickly using our stack and attack approach, and to focus on budgeting and eliminating that debt as quickly as possible, so that when you do get to your vocation, either you've minimized the debt that you're bringing in, or you've eliminated it altogether and gone on to actually save money, begin investing, and you've been a blessing to your future family by doing those actions. And so, again, productive debt is that type of debt where it's either the mortgage, or maybe you took on some debt for the sake of a very well thought out business that you know is going to actually produce more than it's going to cost you, and it's going to cover the debt payment and actually be more valuable to you. In some circumstances, a student loan could be a use of productive debt, but most often, an overwhelming majority of them have not been utilized in that way because people just kind of blasted their way into college. They didn't know what they wanted to study. They just signed on the dotted line for whatever. And so that's how we got into this, millennials not being able to pay their student loans. They did enter into debt beyond their means. They just had no idea it was coming. But in some situations, you could make a very well thought out decision to enter into debt for a student loan. And the income that you're going to have in the job at the end of it could be justified in taking that student loan. You're not taking on $120,000 of debt for a theology degree where you're going to be a youth minister. That would be a very bad idea, and I wouldn't recommend it. But we have a lot of people that have done that, and that's an unwise choice, and I wouldn't encourage people to go down that path. If that is you, don't despair, but it's time to really work on paying that down.
Mm-hmm. And while we're discussing a Catholic approach to debt, we've been discussing much of what we take on and looking ahead of seasons in life. But I love it in our last few moments. If you're just joining me, that's Jonathan and Amanda Taxera from walletwin.com. They're Catholic financial coaches with a Catholic take. It's refreshing on finances and keeping yourself out of that hole that is so easy to dive into. What would you say the approach is then, if you could touch on a little bit of paying the debt off? If you already have it, whether you've made good choices or bad choices with what you've taken on, here you are, you're in it. What principles would you gather to approaching it?
I think one of the first things that you need to do is to stop the accumulation of debt.
Stop the bleeding.
Yes. Yeah. Apply a tourniquet to your finances. So, if we are... If you've got a leaky, if your tub is overflowing, before you start throwing down towels, or, if it's really bad, getting a bucket and, dishing out the water or whatever, you're going to reach in and you're going to turn off the spigot or the faucet so that the water stops flowing in. So we're going to stop accumulating more debt. We're going to get rid of the credit cards. We're going to cut our lifestyle expenses, whatever it is, where we're going to
delete it from your browser.
Delete it out of your browser, get it out of your account so it's not saved. Get rid of the thing. And then now that the inflow or the accumulation of debt has stopped, now we can turn our attention to dealing with the mess. And at that point, I think it's what we recommend, what we call the stack and attack method, where you stack up your debts one by one. The lowest debt amount at the top of the list, and then you pay them all off you pay minimum payments on all of them to keep everybody happy, stay out of collections, all that business. And then all the other money you have left for debt repayment goes towards the little guy. You want to just pick off the pipsqueak there, and then you start feeling it because you're going to gain momentum. You can pay that first little guy off quickly. It's the fastest one you're going to be able to get to, which means you get a win as fast as possible, which makes you feel good, which lights up these reward centers in your brain. And you go, I want to do that again. And now it's easier to make wise financial decisions, to say no to things, to say yes to opportunities to earn a little extra money. And now you can get to the next one faster. And that's going to gain momentum as, one, you're getting better at handling your money. And two, you're getting more excited about paying it off. And three, you have less minimum payments to take care of. So more of the money is available to get the next guy. And one by one, you're going to tear up their names, cross them off the list, whatever you would like to do to celebrate, to feel what you just did, to really take advantage of the way God made our brains. And when you follow that system, sure, maybe you're going to end up paying a little bit extra in interest because you didn't go by, interest rate. You went by total amount. But that was to harness the energy of the built-in reward system that God gave us. And if we do that, then you will find that you can make it to the end of this process and get out of the debt and do it quickly because you are so motivated.
It's a Catholic approach to debt with Jonathan and Amanda Taxera, Catholic financial coaches found at walletwin.com. From how much you take on, when you take it on, to paying it off. Please be sure to share this episode with someone who's trying to navigate the increasing cost of groceries or just navigating how to plan out their debt. So share this episode. It'll be available this evening. Just check out wherever you subscribe to podcasts. But the Relevant Radio app is right there. It's free, and you can pray with us there on the app with all of the resources. Thank you again, Jonathan and Amanda. Check them out at walletwin.com. And for more tips from them, be sure to check out the episode notes with other financial episodes with the Taxeras.